From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Mathieu. The Kamala Harris campaign continues its swing state roadshow, rolling through Arizona onto Nevada this weekend, while Donald Trump rallies today in Montana. Joining us this hour, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report on the strategy for both campaigns, and former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman on his support for the Democratic ticket and Iran's attempts to interfere in the U.S. election. And later, we'll have the latest installment of my series on wine in Washington, with a new generation of women rising to the top of the D.C. wine scene, bringing a new perspective and some relief from partisan politics. Thanks for being with us on the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's good to see you. It's been a busy week for what's typically a slow summer season around here, with the announcement of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as the Democratic VP pick, all the way through Donald Trump's hour-long news conference at Mar-a-Lago yesterday. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Michael Shepard and Bloomberg Government's Courtney Rosen to try to help make sense of it all. It's great to see you both here at the table. Happy Friday to both of you. Courtney, I'll start with the road show here for Kamala Harris. It's, I believe, 6 swing states in 7 days. Pretty impressive feat here as she introduces her new running mate to the nation. Not a mistake that we find them in Arizona today, is it?
No, in 6 swing states, or in 7 days, there's 7 swing states. So
we're almost there.
Almost there, yeah. Not a mistake that we find her in Arizona for sure. That's a state that Democrats and her campaign have identified as crucial to her winning the White House. And that's a place where she spent today. Tomorrow she'll head to Nevada, another one on that list of swing states that they really care about. With
the idea of organized labor, of course, hard to escape. She was in Michigan. Michael, earlier this week, courting the vote of UAW membership. She's seen a lineup of unions already announce support from the AFL-CIO on down. Nevada, of course, makes us think of the Culinary Workers Union on the Vegas Strip. Can they help her win that state?
They can certainly contribute to that because they've been critical in the past to either party winning. And that is also a key to the Hispanic vote, especially in Nevada, but also in Arizona and in other states where his Latino voters could make a bit of a difference. And if you are seeing some of these other unions fall into line, I think she stands a decent enough chance with the culinary workers. The president and the administration, of course, have tried to present themselves as the most pro-labor in history. And when you look at the track record, there's certainly some evidence to back that up. Harris also comes in bringing a lot of energy that I think all the unions have been hoping for.
I get the schedule that we're seeing with the Harris-Walz ticket. They went through the blue wall states of Michigan, Wisconsin, now onto the Sun Belt states, Arizona, Nevada. I don't necessarily get the Montana choice for Donald Trump. It's a state he won by double digits. Is he there simply for the Senate race?
It was 16 percentage points, actually, in 2020 over Joe Biden. The reason he is going there is because there is a really tight Senate race between incumbent Democrat Jon Tester and the Republican challenger Tim Sheehan, a former Navy SEAL. Trump wants to show 2 things. One, of course, that he has some down-ballot power, that he has the ability to bring over the line and flip a seat that Republicans very much want to take back. There is also some lingering resentment toward Tester from Trump over the role that Tester played in blocking one of his hand-picks to take over the Veterans Administration. Ronnie Jackson.
He's going to be there on stage. This ought to be a riot.
And he may very well relish this moment from his former boss, the former commander-in-chief.
So the retribution tour continues.
And that's one way to put it.
Talking about with Michael Shepard. So, Courtney, enter a guy named Joe Biden, apparently making his return to the campaign trail. He's going to be in Maryland next week with Kamala Harris. Is this something that we'll see a lot of? Does she want to be sharing a stage with him? What do you make of the optics here?
Vice President Harris and President Biden haven't really signaled what role he's going to play in her campaign, right? We're only a couple weeks in where she's at the top of the ticket. And when I was in briefings this week with the White House, and that was a question that came up quite often from reporters of how big of a role is President Biden going to play, and they haven't publicly decided on that yet. This will be their first joint appearance on a campaign-style event. It's billed as a White House event, but looking at the messages they're going to be conveying about the economy, it's a campaign event for sure.
It's like a data-dependent White House in a whole different way here, data-dependent campaign. We spent the better part of an hour listening to and watching Donald Trump in his news conference at Mar-a-Lago yesterday, where he went through a series of issues. He did take questions from reporters, referred to Kamala Harris as dangerously liberal. He talked about his crowd size on January 6th, rivaling that of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Had a Dream speech, and I could go on. I talked about some of the rhetoric that we heard from Donald Trump today with Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland. Here's what he had to say.
She's also continuing to dominate the media. I think part of the reason Trump had the press conference yesterday was he's been sidelined in part by his own silly comments, but also because of the rise of her campaign. And I think he's trying to figure out a way to get back into it. They had Vance following them around for a couple of days, kind of nose pressed up against the window. Yeah, it was kind of funny.
You know, Michael, a lot of people have been asking how long is it going to be until Kamala Harris does an interview, until there's a news conference, and those are real questions. But how much time does Donald Trump have to coalesce around a message that sticks in running against this new candidate?
He's beginning to feel a sense of urgency, and you can see it this week. Earlier in the week, he did this rather lengthy conversation with a controversial video game personality and celebrity, Aiden Ross. He did the news conference that we all saw and left some of us wondering, okay, where are you taking this? Next week, he is set to meet with and be interviewed by Elon Musk. This will be their first interaction since Musk stepped in and decided to endorse the former president's campaign bid now.
Sure.
So where this ends up in terms of what will Trump stand for and how he will calibrate his message against Harris, we're still waiting to see that. We're still learning about the Harris campaign.
Right.
And so is Donald Trump.
And I suspect the more that she speaks, Courtney, when these interviews do happen, when this news conference does take place, the Trump campaign will actually have something to work with. Right now, there's just a lot of unknowns.
We don't know yet what her specifics would be if she were to gain the White House, right? She hasn't laid out specific policy positions as a candidate. What would make her different from President Biden? What decisions would she make differently should she get the job? And that's a lot of her conversations in the last couple of weeks have been about, you know, getting her name out there, getting energy, getting enthusiasm, but not so much on specifics.
Right.
And so I'll be watching for that in the next couple of weeks going into the Democratic convention to see if we get a better idea of how she would govern.
Let us know when you get some time with the Vice President
Working
at the
on
White House. I bet you are, too. Michael Shepard, Courtney Rosen, great conversation and great reporting. Thank you both. Coming up, we'll take a look at how the Harris-Walz ticket is measuring up against the Trump-Vance ticket in those crucial swing states we're talking about with none other than Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, is with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I had 107,000 people in New Jersey. You didn't report it. I'm so glad you asked. What did she have yesterday? 2,000 people? If I ever had 2,000 people, you'd say my campaign is finished. I have 10 times, 20 times, 30 times the crowd size. And no, they never say the crowd was big. That's why I'm always saying turn around the cameras.
It's like the good old days. Donald Trump, that was actually just yesterday, making claims in his news conference about the differences in crowd sizes between his and Kamala Harris's campaign events. J.D. Vance has been more visible on the campaign trail this week following Harris and Walz when 3 swing states were switched to the toss-up category from leans Republican by the influential Cook Political Report. Not just any states, Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. Joining us now, Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, who I always have so many questions for. Where to begin here? I'm going to get to the states because I want the rationale here, Amy. It's great to see you. Welcome back. But what were you thinking yesterday watching this for a campaign that we were told was going to be more disciplined, more efficient? They were measuring the drapes in Milwaukee. What are we doing now?
That's right. I mean, we saw some early indication that it was going to be very difficult for Trump to remain as disciplined and on message. Even in Milwaukee, if you recall, his acceptance speech was a little bit long, a little bit rambling, but more important, it lost the train of the message, right? It was, he went in and out of his sort of traditional grievance, his frustrations about what happened in 2020, that the election was stolen, that Nancy Pelosi is crazy, all of that. But it didn't really matter as much because the focus was on Biden, and Biden was his age, and his performance at the debate was everything. Now that Biden's no longer in the picture, the focus goes back to Donald Trump, or at least Donald Trump wants to be the focus once again. I think he's frustrated that media attention is going to not just Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and the fact that they're a brand new ticket, but taking the rallies live, showing these long lines of people waiting to get into the rallies. So I remember when Harris was, picked, shall we say, when the president endorsed her right after he announced he wasn't running again. And a number of Democrats said to me, the one thing that Harris really can do is to get under Donald Trump's skin. And that would be one of her biggest, strengths. And indeed, as you could see from that press conference, she has.
Well, so much so he wants to do 3 debates all of a sudden.
That's right.
Amy, and he's taking a pretty interesting approach to Kamala Harris's running mate here as well. We're talking about stolen valor this week. Some very heady accusations. J.D. Vance saying that Tim Walz abandoned his brothers in arms before they were deployed to Iraq when he decided to run for Congress. It's pretty remarkable. And Kamala Harris did respond to that line of attack briefly yesterday. Here's what she said.
Listen, I praise anyone who has presented themselves to serve our country. And I think that we all should.
So we seem to be in a world here where the Harris-Walz campaign wants to try to fly over most of this stuff. Just stay above it. Don't get in the weeds with Donald Trump.
That's
Is
right.
that the most effective strategy, or do they need to start knocking these down?
Well, yeah, I think the most important thing that we're going to all be looking for in these next 80 whatever many days we have left in the campaign is who does the better job of defining both Harris and Walz, but mostly Harris, because, the vice president, while an important figure, is not the principal, and voters come out and vote for the presidential candidate, not so much for the vice president. So who defines her and how is she defined? The good news for Harris is right now she is not burdened by what has been, so to speak, that she is more popular than Biden right now. She is not getting as much of the blowback, or I guess he's not as much of an anchor. The economy, all of those things, not as much of an anchor around her as it was for Biden. And part of that, too, is she isn't very well defined in the minds of voters. They don't know that much about her. And this is why you're seeing the Trump campaign spend a great deal of time on paid media, not necessarily with their candidate, the former president, but in paid media, going after her record on immigration, going after her opinions and views on police reform, calling her dangerously liberal for some of these positions. So trying to fill in the full picture of Harris. And Harris, of course, is doing the same. She's out with her own ad on immigration, saying that when she was in office in California, she was really tough on border security and cracking down on traffickers. And so this sprint to define Harris, I think, is going to be critically important. And then the next thing will be, what is this race about? And this is where Trump still has an advantage if the race really does come down to who do you think would do a better job on the economy? Who do you think would do a better job on immigration and border security? Trump continues to have an advantage there. If it's about Donald Trump, as we saw at that press conference, that it looks like And what you were talking about earlier, he goes on the retribution tour in Montana instead of spending time in a battleground state. He decides to debate crowd size instead of debating immigration or debating inflation. If that's where this race goes, then that is really good news for Harris.
Joe Biden, Amy, is going to be on stage with Kamala Harris next Thursday in Maryland. First time we're going to see this, 4 days before the Democratic National Convention. Who does this help?
Well, that's a really good point. Look, I think, as you pointed out, it's 4 days before the convention. So what Harris is going to do is go straight from there into the warm embrace of her party and her party's delegates. It wasn't looking that way a month ago. The idea of Chicago being a place of excitement and energy a month ago would be laughable. Now that's exactly what's happening. And look, we'll see a contrast. I think the challenge for Harris is finding enough distance from Biden and the unpopular stuff about Biden, and also reminding folks about the good stuff that they can say the administration is responsible for bringing to the public. The other thing that really stands out when Harris stands next to President Biden is the fact that she does look and sound and act very differently from him. And this is what's been quite remarkable, is that even though she is part of the incumbent party, she is the status quo, so to speak. She's been able to come out as a new face, as somebody who's able to flip the page, move on from Biden and Trump. So being on stage with Biden does remind voters that, oh, yeah, she's still part of this administration, but also reminds them that she looks very and sounds very, very different from the person who used to be the nominee.
And that the party has suddenly turned a page. Amy, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back.
Good
Amy
to see you,
Walter,
Joe.
editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report. Safe travels to Chicago. We'll see you there. Coming up, the energy agenda moves to the front burner after Kamala Harris's past comments on oil drilling, on fracking, resurface. We'll have a closer look at how both parties are approaching energy policy on the campaign trail next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. To your point, we have to just acknowledge that the residual impact of fracking is enormous in terms of the impact on the health and safety of communities.
That was then candidate Kamala Harris saying she would ban fracking while running for president in 2019. Her campaign has since walked back those comments. But Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has more as the energy debate continues. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Energy policy is shaping up to be a top issue on the campaign trail. Former President Trump is hitting those comments you just heard of then candidate Harris supporting a ban on fracking in 2019. It's part of his pitch to put domestic drilling front and center.
We will end the Biden-Harris war on American energy, and we will end their terrible war on fracking. Fracking is incredible. I will also terminate the Biden-Harris electric vehicle mandate on day one and save the U.S. auto industry.
Those arguments could resonate in some battlegrounds like Pennsylvania, which is the second largest producer of natural gas in the U.S. The Harris campaign says she does not support a fracking ban despite those past comments, instead alleging this is part of Trump's, quote, attempt to distract from his own plans and enrich oil and gas executives. Meanwhile, Trump's pitch is that more drilling will lower costs and reduce foreign dependence. Our latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult polling finds about a third of voters in battlegrounds say gas prices are a top economic factor in their vote. And when it comes to who they trust to handle the issue, Trump leads Harris by about 12 percentage points. But the Biden administration says they're the ones focused on lowering prices.
We have worked to maintain a balanced price and to make sure that the American economy is not hampered by higher prices, and that American consumers, especially in the summer. So I think we're going to continue to see that trend to try to bring prices down.
Now, for their part, Harris's campaign appears to be shepherding a more progressive energy agenda, but there's much we don't know as the campaign clarifies its policy positions. What we do know is VP pick Tim Walz is considered to be an aggressive advocate on climate. As Minnesota's governor, he's required all state electricity be carbon-free by 2040, and he's helped accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles in the state. A shift to EVs and what it means for jobs was one of the biggest sticking points during the United Auto Workers strike last year, but it hasn't seemed to dampen union support for the Democratic ticket. And while you heard former President Trump take a swing at EVs before, Joe, over the weekend, he said the cars are growing on him since Tesla founder Elon Musk has thrown his weight behind the Trump ticket.
The power of Elon. Maybe they'll talk about that in the interview on Monday night, Kendall. I want to hear more about Tim Walz, though. This is interesting as we try to get our arms around what will be the Harris-Walz energy agenda and what you've learned about his time as governor of Minnesota, trying to cut red tape, trying to get around permitting reform. What do we know?
Right, exactly. Well, some of these initiatives that he's implemented at the state level have been elusive when it comes to the federal level here in Washington. You just named one of them, streamlining permitting reform when it comes to renewable energy projects. Just before Congress recessed a couple weeks ago, there was a win out of the Maine Energy Committee, bipartisan win with Senator Joe Manchin and Senator John Barrasso's permitting reform bill did make it out of committee, but its future is unclear when it goes to the floor of the Senate. So things like that, we'll have to see how the campaign is going to use those statewide initiatives that Walz has passed to see if they can convince American voters nationwide. One of the ways that we've seen Governor Walz do that while campaigning in Minnesota during his time as governor is to talk about the creation for jobs around these renewable energy projects. Of course, Republicans push back against some of those assertions, saying that we have to make sure that we are taking care of our domestic drilling energy jobs first.
Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Tyler, we thank you so much for the reporting. Remembering as well, as we learned just last week, a new high water mark, if I can call it that. The United States is producing more oil and gas at this time than ever in its history. So when we hear the refrain, drill, baby, drill, we wonder exactly how much more we could be talking about. That was a big part of the conversation in Milwaukee, and it certainly will be again in Chicago as we wait for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to do the interviews and news conferences that many are asking them to do, so we have a better sense of the details of the policy that Tyler was just talking about. Coming up, we're going to take a look at Republicans who have committed to vote for Kamala Harris this November. One of them is up next. The former Republican congressman from Virginia, Denver Riggleman. Republicans for Harris next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
She's not doing any news conference. You know why she's not doing it? Because she can't do a news conference. She doesn't know how to do a news conference. She's not smart enough to do a news conference. And I have to tell you, J.D. Vance has really stepped up. He's doing a fantastic job. So I think the abortion issue has been very much tempered down. Anybody that votes for them, if you're Jewish or if you love Israel, you have to have your head examined. There's certainly never been anybody so liberal like these two.
Some of the moments from Donald Trump's hour-long news conference yesterday at Mar-a-Lago, where he continued to take aim at his opponent, Kamala Harris. But some members of his own party are starting to look across the aisle this November as to where they can cast their vote, and one of them is here now. The former Republican Congressman, Denver Riggleman of Virginia. It's good to see you back, Congressman. Welcome. You held a Republicans for Harris event at the great Silverback Distillery, joined by none other than Mitch Landrieu. And I was starting to wonder what world we were in here with the Democratic mayor, now campaign advisor, the former Republican congressman. What's going on?
I think what's going on, first of all, there's no better place to meet than over a tumbler of bourbon, my friends. So I think that's the great meeting place that we have. I won't argue with that. Yeah, but what's really going on is that I think truth and facts need to be the baseline for this election. Sanity, almost like this pro-reality army that Mitch and I were talking about, is that you can't have an inveterate liar, as president of the United States. And that's really what our discussion was about. It was about policy, but it's about the real reasons why Republicans should have the permission structure to vote for the Democratic ticket. And it was just it was an amazing conversation that we had at the distillery.
Well, you're telling Republicans to vote for Kamala Harris in the 5th District of Virginia. What are you hearing back from Republicans?
I think the surprise when we had the distillery event, it was more me and Mitch getting to know each other, and we had invited a few people. But then we had about a 60-40 split between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And what we're hearing is that maybe there should be a simple baseline of when you're voting for POTUS. And I brought up 5 things, right? You shouldn't vote for a rapist. You shouldn't vote for a felon. You shouldn't vote for somebody who wants to buddy up to dictators. You shouldn't vote for a conspiracy theorist. And you shouldn't vote for somebody who thinks January 6th is okay. I think those 5 baseline actions are what Republicans should be looking at. And if you're a conservative, you shouldn't be voting for somebody who seems to be pro-Putin, right, or anti-Ukraine. And I think as you start looking at those baseline structures, I think Republicans say, listen, I'm never going to be a Democrat, but damn it, I'm not going to vote for somebody who can't tell the truth and who rambles on with ridiculousness and actually seems to be anti-woman, anti-truth, and pro-conspiracy theory. I think people can actually get behind that as a message for a person you don't want to be president of the United States.
Well, I can't imagine what your inbox looks like, Denver, but I want to just pick up on one thing that you referred to there, and that's January 6th. Yesterday, remembering that you advised the January 6th committee. Donald Trump was asked in that news conference about the potential for political violence this election season. Here's what he said.
Of course there'll be a peaceful transfer, and there was last time, and there'll be a peaceful transfer. I just hope we're going to have honest elections, that's all, okay?
Was there a peaceful transfer last time?
No. I mean, that's the issue I'm talking about with Republicans, voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, is that there was no peaceful transfer. And it's ludicrous to say that, and for him to say that he's almost projecting about what's going to happen in 2024 and almost sort of pushing the reasons why it's going to happen next time, or there could be an issue, talking about the constitutionality of Kamala Harris taking over for Joe Biden. He's already setting up some of this disinformation, and that's something we're going to see more and more of as we get closer to November, is him just lying and then backing it up with sort of something incendiary or something, that's just polemic, and then just going on to the next thing. But so people need to question him as he puts out that BS that seems to come naturally to him. It's almost like he was bred, it's in his DNA to BS as many people as possible.
Well, Congressman, the Trump campaign is accusing Tim Walz of BS and bringing up his military career. We're hearing accusations of stolen valor, which is a big deal. Your former Air Force intelligence. J.D. Vance, of course, the Marine veteran, says Tim Walz abandoned his men before they deployed to Iraq. He lied about serving in combat, and he inflated his rank. What do you make of this attack?
Well, it's contrary to the facts. Listen, the thing that you don't want to be in the military is a Blue Falcon, right? And that's something that people can go look up on their Google machine anytime they want to. And I'm a Mustang. I'm prior enlisted, and I was a commissioned officer. And the thing is that you have to thank Tim Walz and J.D. Vance both for their service. That's something that only about 1% of Americans do. But we also know that you have to know what retirement rules are. You have to know when somebody actually goes for retirement, or if they haven't finished their professional military education, or if they haven't served 3 years in rank before they retire. There are nuances to military service that are very simple for a service member like myself. But if you're J.D. Vance and you're out there spewing falsehoods to try to get a footprint or a foothold based on disinformation rolling across the internet or across social media, that's what he's doing. And I think it's a shame that you would go after somebody like Tim Walz, who was a command sergeant major, right, retired as a master sergeant, I believe. I'm trying to make sure I'm correct in this. And the reason that he retired at a lower rank wasn't because he was demoted somehow or he didn't deploy. It was because of professional military education he hadn't completed and time in rank. So it's just a very simple problem set. But the fact is, J.D. Vance should not be attacking Tim Walz based on J.D. Vance's background and as a military member. He should know better. And as somebody who's taken an oath to the United States Marine Corps, he shouldn't be acting this way because it's beneath somebody who's running for the office of vice president. And it's absolutely inaccurate to characterize Tim Walz in this way. And I think it's just another pathetic attack. And you just get tired of it, especially as former military. It's just embarrassing to have somebody have that kind of attack on a fellow service member.
Well, we do thank them both for their service, and we have been. Denver, I want to point you to another area of expertise that we talk to you about a lot, and that is security, high-tech security, in this case, online security. with regard to our election. There's reporting today by the Washington Post, and this is coming from Microsoft, that Iran is stepping up efforts to interfere in the November election, amp up American polarization. They've got a new site called Neo Thinker, focusing on the Israeli-Hamas war. They've got another one called Savannah Time that is the About Us blurb of the site reads, "We're opinionated, we're noisy, we're having a good time." People don't realize what they're seeing in many cases with these online posts. How much do we have to worry about election interference? Because Microsoft says Russia is at it again, too.
Well, we already know that we had issues in 2016. Then we know about the bizarre, stop the steal election conspiracy theories in 2020. But we also know that there was issues with foreign individuals or foreign companies or state groups pushing disinformation into the social media ecosystem. I think it's going to be worse than ever. The one thing that's different, people are like, well, Denver, propaganda has been around forever, right? Disinformation's been around forever. Well, the thing is that social media combined with artificial intelligence and the ability to curate, right, not only a message, but to curate that voice and curate that person's likeness in almost real time, and to actually push that is such a dire threat to the United States Republic. And here's why. I don't know who you can attribute this quote to, but it said, what is it? Truth travels around, what does it say? Lies travel around the world faster than truth can put its shoes on. That's the real danger with AI, is that there's this digital push to actually, I would say, to push people into a direction that's completely inaccurate. And it's very difficult to fix that. It's very, very hard to fix those kind of lies. And I think when you're looking at AI with messaging, robocalls, you're looking at digital likenesses, deep fakes. But there's another side to this, Joe. And that other side to this is that you can also use AI to look at inconsistencies, write speeches, things like that. But you can use AI to actually curate a false message too. So I think we have to be very careful about artificial intelligence and the combination of bad actors from foreign sources, but also domestic sources who would rather just win and have power rather than actually treat constituents correctly.
I'm waiting for the deep fakes in October, Congressman. I feel like it's going to be something we have to deal with. Former Republican Congressman of Virginia, Denver Riggleman, Republicans for Harris. Thank you, sir, for coming back to talk to us, as always, here on Bloomberg. Coming up, we're going to look back at the week's biggest campaign moments. There were a lot of them. And look ahead at what will be important to come next week. Our political panel joining us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, for the trust you put in me, but maybe more so, thank you for bringing back the joy.
What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not.
Listen, I praise anyone who has presented themselves to serve our country.
She's not doing any news conference. You know why she's not doing it? Because she can't do a news conference. She doesn't know how to do a news conference. She's not smart enough to do a news conference.
I just wanted to check out my future plane, but I also wanted to go say hello to the Vice President.
And I have to tell you, J.D. Vance has really stepped up. He's doing a fantastic job. I just look forward to these debates. I think it's very important that we have them. I hope she agrees to them.
Well, I'm glad that he's finally agreed to a debate on September 10th. I'm looking forward to it, and hope he shows up.
Yeah, that was just this week. Some of the key political moments of the past few days. And joining us now is our political panel. Good thing they're not exhausted. Lisa Camooso Miller is here, former RNC communications director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, and Jeanne Zaino, of course, Bloomberg politics contributor, political science professor at Iona University, and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to see you both. Welcome. Lisa, that was just the last 5 days. There's an exhaustion here, an exhaustion factor in this campaign. Donald Trump said it himself. I already beat one guy and I have to do it again. Does that fatigue set in for the voter at some point?
Well, yes, I think it does. I mean, also, too, we're watching it breathlessly because this is our job and this is our life, and we're in Washington, D.C.
You're saying we're not normal.
I wonder, though, no, we're not normal. But I do think, too, that the difficulty with all of this, Joe, is that there will be a fatigue going into Labor Day. And if this continues as it does, it's going to cause a malaise amongst the voters. And that, I think, is what the biggest challenge is for either one of these camps, is that they're really going to have to turn out the vote. And if we keep it up the way we're doing it, we're really going to have a great big battle on our hands.
Jeanne, it seems the conventional wisdom is giving this week to Kamala Harris, a win for Kamala Harris, a successful rollout for the running mate, good press for the most part, packed rallies. But you know what the refrain is from the Trump camp and from a lot of voters. When are you going to answer questions? When are you going to sit down for a real interview? When will your news conference happen? Is it possible for her to keep the honeymoon going once she actually starts being specific about policy?
We'll have to see. She is out there. She has had a few good weeks, as you mentioned. She is going to have to sit down and answer some tough questions. And I think for me, this is the biggest sort of question I have in my mind, which is, why can't Donald Trump take the questions to her? That press conference yesterday was confusing. It was scattered. He said many strange things, and he couldn't get himself together to attack her in areas where she is vulnerable. The economy, inflation, cost of living, immigration. The list goes on, and almost any Republican, traditional Republican of note, could take those to Kamala Harris. And to your point, she'd have to answer those questions. But when you're going to talk about Martin Luther King's, size of his crowds versus yours on January 6th, that's not what he should be doing. And so I think that their campaign is flummoxed. They are struggling, and he's going to have to get back on message if they're going to turn this thing around.
So we've got some time for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to figure that out, Lisa. What's this process like now? I mean, clearly he's testing things in real time in the news conference, in his rallies. He's had Laugh-In Kamala, Cacklin co-pilot. He seems to have dropped those. He was doing Kamabla for some. I'm not even sure I quite understand what the insult is there. How much time do they have, though, to crystallize a message as to why Kamala Harris is wrong for America?
Well, he's got the base with him. The base doesn't care if he stands in front of a camera and says nothing for an hour. That did nothing for the party, the part of the party that's going to be with him. They're going to be with him regardless, no matter what he says, no matter what he does. It's that middle ground, that group of moderates and those who still are not with him and not necessarily with her, that he's going to have to appeal to. And ordinarily it would be through a smart vice president in this case. J.D. Vance had a very stumbled start, and so that didn't really work out so well for him. Last week, I was predicting that possibly he could even be offered to be fired. And we'll see what happens there. I know that there has been some suggestion that maybe they were consulting the lawyers about what that possibility is. I think it's really difficult for them to figure out how to renegotiate and readjust. But any good campaign manager, and the people that are running his campaign really are some of the best. They've won campaigns before. Ordinarily would have had a plan in place in order to fix for this adjustment, and it seems like possibly they have, but the candidate himself has not.
And coming up on Balance of Power, wine and hospitality, a salve for partisan politics in Washington. We'll give you an inside look at the role of a D.C. sommelier, one that's becoming more commonly associated with women. A lot more ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Stay with us.
Sir, you're the answer to all this partisanship.
We all eat and drink.
I think we found the middle ground.
Yeah.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. As we close out another bruising week in politics, we turn to the latest installment of our series on wine in Washington. And a new generation of women rising into prominent roles in the business at a time when fresh perspectives are in high demand. I sat down with one of them inside the wine cellar at the Dabney, a Michelin-starred restaurant in downtown D.C., where Jessica Liberto Hosseini works as beverage director and at times political moderator in Uncorking, Washington.
It's interesting because the wine business can get to be a bit of an echo chamber, right? How many times do you have the same people coming in here asking for the same 10 wines because we all want to play the greatest hits? So what does diversity bring to that problem?
I think the more people, the more voices you have, it allows more of an accessibility to wine. With diversity in people, you're getting diversity in tastes. Some people are looking for, something celebratory, something playful, which I think the more voices and people you have, then you're hitting all of those things.
Well, you could be a sommelier in a lot of places, but you're a DC somm.
Yes.
And you're doing this at a Michelin star restaurant, at a destination restaurant in rarefied air.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with a lot of the same people I cover here in the world of politics that we talk about on Bloomberg TV and radio. To what extent does that affect your approach, affect the list that you're writing? And what's it like to interface with these bold faces when they're off the job?
I mean, I think all of us that live in DC know you can't escape what is around you. It infiltrates, most things because it is your day to day. For us, I think it really reminds me, though, that whether people feel different ways about different things, whether it be politics, all these things, you have every opinion here in DC.
Yeah.
There is a respite and a common denominator, and that's food and beverage. And whether they, care one way about something or the other, at the end of the day, they're people that we're taking care of. And I think our current climate, our always climate, the last 7 years really almost forces you to remember that, especially during weird times here.
Yeah. So you're the answer to all this partisanship.
We all eat and drink.
I think we found the middle ground.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a step further then. To what extent does massive political change, you've been here for 7 years, resonate in the wine business and in the hospitality business?
A good deal. I mean, I think you always, I've been here for several changes, and that, kind of when that happens, obviously, again, talk about people being people, there's emotions, there's things like that. You see sales and clientele change. You see, people, especially with wine, drinking more, drinking less. Everything kind of is in ebbs and flows. But again, at the end of the day, it's dinner, and we're all doing it.
Do Democrats and Republicans have different preferences when it comes to wine?
Everybody has different preferences. No.
So you're not going to tell me the Republicans all order the big cabs and Democrats come and ask for a rosé?
No.
Okay.
I'll tell you, on the last time she was here, RBG drank Sancerre on her birthday. Multiple bottles. And then before dessert, went home because she was tired.
I bet that happens from time to time here. Jessica, thank you for having us in the cellar.
Thank you for joining us.
Here's to your success, and here's to the hearth.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Back with us now, our political panel, Lisa Camooso Miller and Jeanne Zaino. In our remaining moments, as we drop things for the week in politics, Jeanne, what do you think of common ground here? The fact that when we do put our guard down, politically speaking, we find actually most people have a lot in common.
Yeah, that's right. And I love hearing the story about RBG. And of course, she famously was very good friends with people on the other side on the Supreme Court. And I would suggest that she drank with them as well, a glass of wine every once in a while.
What do you think here, Lisa? If wine is not the salve, maybe just getting to know each other and having a conversation face-to-face is the answer. Isn't that what we learned from Jessica?
Oh, no doubt about it. And I'm lucky enough to have I know the maestro that is Jessica at the Dabney. That place is magical, and how lucky for you to be in that space with them to talk about that, because I think you do see Republicans and Democrats and everybody in between coming to a place like that to break bread. It's to me, the way politics started, the way for me in my career, was that once we got done with beating ourselves up in the Capitol or wherever it was in the State House, that we found time to come together and have great conversations over wine.
Well, that's right. I love that. That's why we had you come over tonight, Lisa. This is why we get along. Jeanne, is that the dirty secret of Washington, that actually Democrats and Republicans do live their lives side by side here in the nation's capital?
That's right. You know, we keep hearing about this. You know, one of the things they said about Barack Obama, he didn't do enough of the socializing. It does matter that you do all those things that Lisa just talked about, that you get a glass of wine, that you relax, that you talk and you converse with people who aren't exactly like you and don't agree with you, because that's how we change minds and that's how we communicate in a healthy way.
Yeah. Well, it was great to meet Jessica and spend some time with so many women changing the face of the wine business. Lisa Camooso Miller and Jeanne Zaino, thanks for sharing that with us. It's great to see you both here, and have a great weekend. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online for more on all the stories that we talked about on this Friday edition of Balance of Power. It's going to be another newsy weekend because that's the world we're in. And we'll see you back here next week on Bloomberg TV and radio.